Hello, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Mary, and today's video is going to be... Sorry, my dog is coughing. What's up? Let's start over. Hello, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Mary, and today's video is going to be some tips to help you get out of a reading slump.
I should have told you that I loved you one more time.
So I've been slumping on and off kind of since about May. I've been like very up and down with my reading. Like I'm either reading 300 pages in a day or I won't read for like 4 days. So it's not the best way to feel. I know being in a reading slump feels really annoying, especially if you're the type of person like I have been in the last couple of years who is reading just a lot. If you read a lot regularly and you're not reading as much, or I know a lot of people in the booktube community are doing readathons, you're doing reading challenges, you've got a TBR set, and if you can't get those books done, it can be really frustrating. So hopefully some of these tips help you out. I'm sure you've heard some of these before because I'm not going to reinvent the wheel with this video, but I did want to give you some of the tips that I have been utilizing to help me sort of get out of a reading slump. First and foremost, I'm going to say, I know a lot of people say to mood read when you're in a reading slump. I find that the opposite is more helpful for me. So if I like create a TBR and set a deadline for myself, I think that's really the best way for me to get out of a reading slump. Obviously, if I find that I'm not interested in anything that I'm reading, that can be tricky, but I use some of the other tips in this video that I'm about to talk about to create that TBR, and having just the set amount of books that I'm planning on reading is really helpful, and also setting like a reasonable TBR. Because if you set a TBR with 15 books for a month and you're in a reading slump, you're probably not going to read anything. At least I get like this. If I can't complete my TBR, I get kind of a defeatist attitude and I just give up on the whole thing. So, and with setting a TBR like that, I find it very helpful to map out the pages that I need to read each day. And that just helps me, if I know I have to read 90 pages a day to finish my TBR, that is going to motivate me to read those 90 pages a day. Now, if you're in a reading slump, I would suggest lowering your page count. And that's what I meant by like reading fewer books or even reading shorter books. That's another thing that I think really helps because it's something to tick off your to-do list. It's like putting on a basic task that you already know you have to do anyways on your to-do list for the day, just so you can check it off because it gives you a sense of accomplishment.
Talented, brilliant, incredible, amazing.
So that's another one of my tips. I'm not really counting these by numbers, but that's something that I definitely think helps. Along with shorter books, reading books that have shorter chapters or lots of chapter breaks can be really helpful for a reading slump, because if you just know that you have like 10 pages in this chapter, you can bang that out a lot faster than you could bang out a chapter with like 30 pages. I don't know why I'm saying bang out. I really hate that I said that so many times just now. Anyways, another just like basic tip that I'm sure you've heard before is to read something light and fluffy when you're in a reading slump. So if you don't typically read adult high fantasy, probably now is not the time for you to pick up Lord of the Rings. You want to make sure you're reading something that is well in your comfort zone, so that you can read it more quickly, because it'll, again, give you a sense of accomplishment. And also it could just help you get back into loving to read if that's something that you're struggling with. So for me, this tends to mean like YA contemporary is something that I find light and fluffy that I can read really fast, or like romance. I can read romance really quickly. However, if you're not interested in those types of things, it might be better for you to read, a mystery thriller or something that's going to be just like a quick, fast-paced read that'll help you get through it. Another really cool trick that I've used is just going to the library without any TBR planned and browsing your shelves. Browsing those shelves. You can also do this at home if you own a lot of books that you haven't read. But sometimes I find when I'm in a reading slump, I don't want to read anything that I own. I'm like, what the heck? I don't even want to read any of this. So either going to a library physically, if that's not feasible for you right now, because I understand that different parts of the world are in lockdown, different cities in the US might be in restrictions as well, just because of Delta variant. Or if you're just not comfortable going out, if you have a Kindle or an e-reader, I know Kindle at least has Kindle Unlimited. So if you have Kindle Unlimited, a really cool thing to do is go on that part of the app on your Kindle and scroll through what they have on Kindle Unlimited until you find something that catches your eye. But I really do think if you just go to a library or even a bookstore, if you're into buying books, and just look for something that catches your eye. I know that they always say you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but I definitely judge books by covers and titles. And sometimes if I'm like sick of looking at all the books that I own that I know I need to read or that I wanted to read at one point, but I'm just not in the mood for right now, it helps me to go to the library and pick out something that I've never heard of and just read that. The next tip might seem kind of counterintuitive, and maybe it is, but I would say don't force it. Like if you're in a reading slump, it's very rude. If you're in a reading slump, it's probably because you don't really want to read, or you're burnt out from reading, or for whatever reason, you can't focus on reading. So maybe try to focus on something else, whether that's watching a TV show that you haven't seen in a while, or spending more time, doing creative things like painting or drawing. Whatever you like to do that's not reading, maybe focus your energy on that. And when you want to read again, you'll come back to it. Check in how you feel every day or so, every few days. But I do think realistically, that's something that helps as well, is just taking a break from it. Because if you're experiencing burnout, you don't want to burn yourself out further. That said, if you have spent like a week binging TV shows, watching the movies you haven't seen yet, drawing on whatever you draw on, journaling, whatever it is that you do, if you've spent several days or like a week or even several weeks doing those things and you still don't feel the need to read, this is when I would circle back to create a TBR that's very manageable, maybe 4 books for a month or even 1 book for a week. Map out the number of pages that you would need to read each day and force yourself to read those pages. And that could help you build back up the habit. Even just getting into the habit of reading a chapter of your book before you go to bed. Or if you wake up early, if you're a morning person, reading a chapter of your book when you first wake up in the morning. These are things that I find to be really helpful when I'm in a reading slump personally. So let me know down below if you have any tips of your own to share with everybody for what you think people should do in their reading slumps, to help people get out of their reading slumps. But now I'm going to share a few books with you that I have read that have helped me get out of a reading slump, and just give you some examples of what I mean. Okay, for one suggestion, this is a tip that I actually didn't mention because I'm dumb or not thinking or whatever, but this kind of goes along with short chapters, short stories. So this is I Am an Executioner by Rajesh Parameswaran. I don't think I'm pronouncing that right at all.
That is not correct.
This is a set of short stories that I've actually had since high school. I bought this in high school to read, but it's very cute, and it's different angles of like different love stories. One of the stories in this, just to give you like a little taste, a little flavor, a little flair to see if it's something that would be up your alley. One of the stories is from the perspective of a tiger in a zoo who has fallen in love with their like person who feeds them, like the zookeeper, and then things go awry from there. But this is a really good one. Another one that I would recommend is Someone Who Will Love You in All Your Damaged Glory by Raphael Bob Waxberg. I feel like I've talked about this book a lot, but not really so much this year. I read this last year. It was one of my favorite books of the year, and it's a collection of absurdist SFF, like short fiction. My favorite story from that is called Up and Comers, and it's about a group of bandmates who discover that they have the ability to have superpowers if they're really, really drunk. So they start getting drunk and trying to fight crime or whatever, and then obviously things go a little bit awry. It's just funny things like that. Another thing that I would recommend is a series that you're familiar with, like To All the Boys I've Loved Before. I read this after having watched the movies, and I was not in a slump at the time that I read this, but I do think I would consider picking this up if I ever was in a reading slump, because it's such a familiar story that you can just sort of read it and re-experience it without having to do like too much mental work. But I loved this book. This is about Laura Jean, who is a high school girl, and she ends up fake dating this really popular boy from her school named Peter Kavinsky. And they end up fake dating because she writes love letters to all the boys she's ever had a crush on. And she always writes it at the end of her crush. So when she no longer has feelings for the boys, she writes them this love letter, and she seals it up, and she addresses it, and she puts it in a hat box. And one day her letters get out. And so Peter gets a letter because she had a crush on him in junior high, but so does her sister's boyfriend. And so it's this big thing about how her sister's, my sister's boyfriend or sister's ex-boyfriend, something like that. And so she is obviously horrified that her sister's boyfriend / ex-boyfriend or whatever has this letter from her that's a love letter, so she pretends to date Peter. Meanwhile, Peter is trying to make his ex-girlfriend jealous by dating Laura Jean, and it's just very cute. There's also a Netflix adaptation of all 3 of these books, if you want to watch that instead of reading them. And I have a video comparing the 3rd book in the series to its Netflix adaptation, which I will link somewhere in case you are curious about watching that. Another type of book that I think is really, really good for getting out of a reading slump, just for quick-paced reads, are thrillers. So I have You by Caroline Kepnes here, which again has a Netflix adaptation if you want to watch the show. I watched the show before reading the book, and I still really enjoyed the book. And I have the second one back there, but I haven't read it yet. Also, I have Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. Gillian Flynn? I'm not sure. But this is probably my favorite thriller of all time. I know that it's very old, so there's a chance that you've already read it. But if you haven't read it or seen the movie especially, you should go read this because you will fly through it. And there's such a crazy twist halfway through it. And I've been waiting for another thriller to have a twist that really shocks me like this one did. But so far, no luck. But yes, thrillers are a great way to get out of a reading slump, especially if you like suspense and just that kind of feeling, just because they're so fast-paced and so quick to read. Another genre that is one of my favorites to read when I'm in a reading slump is romance, and so my recommendation for this would be The Bride Test by Helen Huang, which is my favorite romance that I read last year. And I've been reading a lot more romances this year, but I don't own as many of them. But I really, really loved The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. I devoured that book. I also really loved If I Never Met You by, I think her name is Mari McFarlane. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but both of those are office romances, and they both have fake dating in them. They're really, really good. The Hating Game has more steamy scenes, whereas If I Never Met You is very fade to black, but they're both really good. This is a romance about it's like a forced marriage almost situation, but it's this woman who lives in Vietnam, and it's always confusing for me to explain this, but Esme is living in Vietnam, and then Kai lives in the US, but he's Vietnamese, I believe. Kai's mother wants Kai to get married, but Kai's on the autism spectrum, and so he doesn't really feel like he has human connections, and he has no real desire to seek those out. It's something that he wants, but it's not something that he thinks he'll ever be able to get, if that makes sense, because of the way that his brain works. And so Kai's mother goes to Vietnam, meets Esme, and tries to get Esme to come back to the US to marry Kai. And she says you can have a 90-day tourist visa. If it doesn't work out, you can just go back to Vietnam. But if it does work out and you want to marry him at the end of the 90 days, you guys can get married. So it's a little iffy if that's actually how that would work. But they fall in love, obviously. But this is a really cute story. And what I loved about it is that Esme has her own goals and ambitions. And she doesn't really rely on Kai it's not like she's relying on him to get her a green card so she can go to the US. She has other means of getting that for herself. She just never really believed in herself before, which is really cute. So it's really cute to watch them encourage each other and sort of fall in love from that. If you're sensing a theme with all of these, I'm pretty sure there's a fake dating element. This one's not really fake dating, but it's like an arranged dating situation. That's just something that's a trope that I really love. I didn't realize all of the ones that I recommended were going to be like that, but those are all my favorite romances that I've read. And so there you have it. But those are some recommendations to help you get out of reading slump. Let me know if any of these are helpful and if you like any of these books. Also, again, leave your recommendations for either tips or books to read to get out of a reading slump if you feel so inclined in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel because I do post 2 videos every single week. And I will see you in the next one. Bye!